I love the awkward silence. That's always the best part of the program is when we start, when you hit click and I got to wait for the fucking thing so I can repost it. So
Sorry.
Sunday night, folks, this is something special. This is something new. This is, I had to make sure of something because we have a guest on here on our program tonight, Nicholas, who I think has appeared on TLDR more in the past month than I have.
Yes.
And I didn't want to get fucking Adam Cold or Wally Pipped or Wally Zerbiak or whatever. So
Paulie Serbiak, what a pull.
what
Bravo,
a
sir.
pull. So tonight, folks, it is spooky season. This is a spooktacular issue for TLDR. We are talking top 10 comic books. I know I usually have the whole ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls thing, but I will save that for when we do what's new later this week. But we want to jump right to it because we have a lot of spooky ass books that we would talk about. And I want to welcome Dork Podcast Zone, Richard Milhouse Keefe. I'm pretty sure that's your real middle name. At least I've convinced myself.
There
of
is.
this. Yeah.
Named after the famous Simpsons character. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Dr. Joe. Really, we could call this episode the top 10 books that Joe has to read during the day.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're looking at here. These are the spooky ones. These are the ones that keep you up at night. And so
I stole one of Violet's pull-ups. I'm wearing it right now.
Smart. Good man.
That's a great point, Rich. If it wasn't for friggin' SEO, that would probably be the title of this episode.
Oh,
wow. God, the fact we're doing it this hour at night too. I know we always do it at night anyways, but that is I'm proud of you, Joe. There are some scary fucking books here. So yeah, we did this, was it 2 years ago now, Rich, on #Dork. We did top 10 horror comics there. We may talk about that list later because hopefully Rich still has that handy, and hopefully I remember to bring it up later. But wanted to address the scoring system a little bit because we did this similar to how you do it on Dork, but changed a little bit up here. So individual lists, like scoring, is kind of the same. Top ranked comic on our individual list gets 10 points, and then the bottom one gets 1. You can figure out the rest from there. Then I added in a little bit of a wrinkle here. Multiple list mentions gets bonus points. So if a book is mentioned on 2 out of our 3 lists, it gets 1 extra point. If a book is mentioned 3 times on all 3 of our lists, it gets 2 extra points. Obviously, 1 time doesn't get any extra points. Why not? So there's also tiebreakers too. So we have the first tiebreaker is going to be number of lists, and we'll talk about some of that as we go along. Then you have the highest ranking from there. If those 2 stats are even, as long as it's not the number 1 book, we just called it a tie at that point because I don't give a shit to figure out a third tiebreaker. So that is that. We are doing top 10. Maybe we'll get to the honorable mentions later. Let's start things off, of course, at the bottom. Joe, kick us off, please.
I just want everyone to know I didn't rig shit.
I don't know about that.
I didn't rig shit. This is a book that I read. I recommended to Keefe and I recommended to, and talked about on the show, and Nick finally got around to reading it. And there's a couple of creators that I've talked about recently who there's just teams that writers, artists that just make killer fucking horror books. No pun intended. Butt intended. And come shut up, Nick. And so coming in at number 10 is Gideon Falls, written by Jeff Lemire, with art by Andrea Sorrentino. And this is from Image, but they've also, formed their Bone Orchard Mythos, which is a whole series of horror books. But when these two get together, it is some really, fucked up shit. So a quick synopsis on Gideon Falls. The lives of a washed up Catholic priest arriving in a small town full of dark secrets and a reclusive young man obsessed with conspiracy in the city's trash become intertwined around the mysterious legend of the Black Barn, an otherworldly building alleged to have appeared in both the city and the small town throughout history, bringing death and madness in its wake. I did not fuck that up. I want that on the record. That was a tremendous read.
Well done, sir. This is so I was the latest to the Gideon Falls party, and I do want to point out that this is one of the few books that was featured on all of our list. This thing is friggin' outstanding. I as soon as I like the first issue, I was like, oh, I get why Joe absolutely loved this thing. The ending of that is just like, oh, like in that character too. I just like the character who dies at the end of the first issue. Just like, Yeah, I know that fucking character, and it's like, so I wasn't exactly broken up about her biting the dust. But anyways, yeah, this was to me like everything about this too, because one thing I've kind of started to think about a lot more recently, especially with horror, is just like there's like the atmosphere is something that's really important for me, whether it's shows or movies or comics. And this has such a dense atmosphere, such a creepy one, and then obviously the main villain in this is friggin' terrifying. So I absolutely love this. I am very happy this is on our list.
I'm usually more of a story over the art. It's close. It's not like it's like 90-10. Like I enjoy like a good story slightly over the art, but I think with this one, like the art is what jumps out to me, and it's just crazy. It's so well done. You keep waiting to like turn the next page to see what they're gonna do, and whether it's one of those like a full page layout of it, like it puts you in the mood. Like when Doc talks about having to, do this, read these things during the day, like this is one of them that jumps to mind, because I remember hearing you guys talk about this on the show and then reading it after the fact and be like, yeah, I get it now. Like I get it. Real creepy imaging stuff that like sticks with you. For me, that's usually more with like movies. Like I'll watch a movie and then like 2 days later, I'm like, oh my God, that's fucking creepy. A little bit less in comics, but Gideon Falls is one of the few that did that like days later.
Yeah, well, and that's Sorrentino's. That's his trademark. Is he has these wildly abstract panels where it's not just the squares or the rectangles. Like he'll have a page, it'll look like shattered glass, and there'll be fucked up images in all those different shatters. And the image that sticks out to me is that the dude in the red face just looking out of the barn. Right?
Yeah,
it just holy shit! I could still fucking picture that. And that I think when I first read it, I might have sent that like a screenshot of that image to both of you and be like, what the
you
fuck?
did, yeah.
Right. Yeah, you did.
Like, absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
But that's a Sorrentino, Lemire staple is like, that's why I think those two work so well together, is that Lemire is just a world-class writer. And if he's not like writing a book that's depressing as shit and making you want to cry, he's writing a book that scares the shit out of you. And then when he's paired with Sorrentino, you go, fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, so that is Gideon Falls. That for me will always be on my top 10 list.
Yeah, it's a great one. Now, I talked about tiebreakers before. Of course, I had a perfect system. It was all set up. And then we had a friggin' tie at 8th that could not be broken. Friggin' annoying. So we do have a tie at number 8, but it's the only straight up tie where we couldn't differentiate here. Rich, why don't you lead us off with that?
All right. Yeah, I thought maybe Strength of Victory might be the tiebreaker, but evidently it's not. So we're going tied for 8th. A book that could easily be number 1. It was number 2 on my list. That is American Vampire by Scott Snyder, art by Raphael Albuquerque. And this is a 34 issue run. And the first 5 issues, each issue had 2 stories going on. Half was written by Scott Snyder, half by Stephen King, which I think got a lot of probably non-comic book fans interested. Like Stephen King, like usually people adapt stuff that Stephen King has already written in his books and then tried to, apply that to comics, movies, TV. But no, like right from Jump Street, Stephen King and Scott Snyder working together on this. And it was great because they were telling stories in sort of like 2 different times. And this whole idea of an American vampire is you have a new kind of vampire. Like vampires are very old, clearly. And this is sort of a new one. And, maybe the sun doesn't affect them like other vampires would. And Skinner Sweet is the character that you follow throughout this entire series. One of the best comic book characters ever, as is Pearl Jones, who is a vampire that he turns kind of early on in this story. I don't know if I mentioned, but it was a Vertigo comic, and then they later on picked up when Vertigo shut down. They gave it like a little bit of a DC Black Label run, like a 10-issue run there. There was also something called The Second Cycle, which came out, which was fine from 2014 to 2015. But the main run of this was written in 2010 through 2013. And what I also love about it is it's the characters through time. And so there's time jumps in there throughout American history, which I think is a really kind of cool way of telling a vampire story. Plus, it's as violent as it can get. And the character of Skinner Sweet is one where he's the worst guy in the world until a few moments where he's kind of not. And then he's back to being the worst guy in the world again. Like it's a really fun character to go on that journey, for lack of a better word, this journey with these characters. I love this book. It's honestly one of my top 10 favorite books of like any genre.
Yeah, I think of all the comics I hear you mention on #Dork, I feel like it's the one that gets the most mentions. And also, too, Scott Snyder is one of 2 writers featured in who received multiple votes for multiple books, I should say, in our voting process. Whether another one is going to come up in the course of these things, maybe honorable mention, who knows? But yeah, American Vampire is absolutely can't miss stuff. I do think that like having it this far down, I do think is surprising for some people because it is a well, go ahead, Joe.
That's my fault. I will.
No,
will
it's
own
not.
up to
I didn't
that.
put it. It wasn't on my list.
But I've got to read it, right?
So
So
Doc hadn't read it. He didn't read it 2 years ago, and it was
Yeah, it took you long. Not enough time. But
it was high on the dork list because when we
Yes.
did the dork list, there's the 3 of us plus Davey, and Davey had it 1, 2, or 3. He had it super high in his, maybe number 1.
I had it on my list as well.
not to humble brag or anything, but I've read close to 2,000 comic books since then. So,
Okay. Okay.
But
Good
not
for
this
you.
one. Not the
Yeah.
not the one that fucking matters. So
Mhm. None of those matter at this point.
2 years when we do this again, I'll have it for that list. I promise.
Yes, but that was on my #dork list. But I mean, there's been a lot of horror comics. We're in such a. I saw someone tweet about this recently. How like we're in like a golden age for horror comics, and really, like you look at our list, you could say, oh, there's some recency bias in there, but at the same time, like there's just a lot of really good stuff that's come out in the past 10 years or so. But anyways, all right, I guess I'll go with mine tied for number 8 with Rich's American Vampire. Of course, this is also a Vertigo series originally, and that has been done in DC and DC Black Label. I went with Hellblazer. Specifically for me, the one that I talk about the most is City of Demons. Of course, that is by the late Cy Spencer and is drawn by Sean Murphy, who's one of my favorite artists out there. Originally, this was by Jamie Delano and John Ridgway, and you've had a ton. I mean, Garth Ennis, I know, Rich, is one that you would talk about if you're talking about Hellblazer. But by and large, like, I love the character of Constantine, and I think he's like when you talk about a lot of these stories, we have, you have Skinner Sweet, who's like obviously a horror comics character who like people know, and then there's someone like a Hellboy who can get thrown in that mix here too. But Constantine, I think for horror comics, he is like the first guy that I always think of. And again, what I love about him so much is when he is written well. Like, yeah, he's the main character, so you want to be on his side, but at the same time, it's like you're kind of an asshole, aren't you? And it's like you want to root for him. And I just, whenever that happens in story, I find that very interesting. And Constantine, like when he's done right, there's no character that is more conflicting to quote unquote root for.
I love him so much. And I think all the stuff, that he deals with, and it's sort of like a whole different area than like the rest of the DC universe kind of plays with. And I think anytime he's included, he makes that story better. Like whether it's Swamp Thing or Batman, the Green Arrow TV show, like anytime you get Constantine and like the dark arts and like communicating with like beings that are in hell or whatever else, like it's awesome. And it's a guy that, does he have powers? Does he not have, like, what does he do that other guys can't do? Like he's always so fascinating and he's cool. Like he's just written always really cool. So I think this is a good call. I did put the Ennis one on mine. That's super dense. It's super long, but I think it's one of the best versions of the character.
Yeah. I mean, I love him because he's one of the more relatable, characters that you're gonna read about, because like I think there's a part of us that all wants to act like a dick sometimes, and he does have some redeemable qualities to him. And I think, I mean, I haven't read much Constantine, but I read City of Demons, which I absolutely love. Yeah, I don't know why. This is just a me thing. Why I don't like consider Constantine horror, even though he's definitely on the darker side of things. But this is a good call, regardless. If you haven't read the City of Demons, or you need to read it. It's absolutely fantastic, and I need to read more of it myself because I feel like I'm missing out.
That's the reason I cite that one is not just that I love it so much, and like that's when I tell people if you want to read horror comics, this is a good place to start. The other thing is like you don't have to know anything about Constantine prior. No, it's just an easy one for you to pick up. Exactly. So that's why it's such a good. It can be a really good starter comic for people in various ways. Quite a few of these can, including our number 7 book. So we've gone past the ties where we can't lean on a tiebreaker. These are all straight up from here on out. What do you got for me, Joe, at number 7?
So this is a book that was very, very high on my list, and this is a book that I, Keefe mentioned it when we talked about Gideon Falls. Like whether you're watching a horror movie or you're reading a horror comic, there's either images or there's stories or there's things that just stick with you. And when I read Red Fork, written by Alex Paknadal with all art by Neil Vendro from TKO Studios, like I read this book, and not only did it scare the piss out of me, but it was also heavy, and it hit you sort of on a different level as well, because there's it's dealing with a lot of different elements other than just horror shit. Small mining town, drug addiction, all that shit, and it's extraordinarily well written, and the art is extraordinarily vicious. Especially considering, once you kind of get into the mines and you know what the fuck's going on there, and sort of how it's poisoning the town and all that stuff. So this is a book that I have, I've got it over here. I've got the hard copy of it. This is a book that I will recommend to anyone and everyone. It's what you should have in your collection. You can read it. It's a good book, I think, to read like every so often. Like I'll go back, I'll reread the Lord of the Rings every few years, shit like that. Like this is one of those books where you have in your bookshelf with all your other, graphic novels, and you just, okay, it's spooky season. I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to read it, and not sleep for 3 days.
How many issues is it? Did you say?
Well, so TKO only does,
Okay.
they only put their books out in graphics. So I think it's the equivalent of like 5 issues.
Got
I
it.
think
So
this
yeah,
one's
one
6.
trade.
But
Okay.
yeah, it's a trade. It's a
Got
trade.
it.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
but
No, I have
it's
not
one-
read it. So honestly, Joe, this could be higher on the list if I gave it a rip. I got to read this one.
Yeah, this is how TKO does their shit, right? Little bit oversized, great,
Nice.
and we'll find a way to get you a copy because it's absolutely excellent.
Well, they have, and they do it in either if you want it in a collected trade edition, or you can get it in a collection of floppies too, which is kind of nice, and it comes in like a hard case. But yeah, this was on my list. It actually moved down since we since we did it on talk about this on Dork a couple of years back. But I still love this, and I think it's just I haven't read it in a really long time. But yeah, this is when you're TKO Studios is a company that we've talked about a little bit, but not as much lately. I know Cullen Bunn's got something coming out with them fairly soon, but they are definitely like that. This is one of their best books, and they got some really good ones over there too. But yeah, that Red Fork comes in at number 7 on this list. Number 6, there was a tiebreaker at this one. It has the same score as 5, but this one had a slightly lower rank on individual listing. Keefe, this one's all yours.
Yeah, number 6 is Nail Biter by Joshua Williamson and Mike Henderson, and it's an Image book. A lot of people would know Williamson from his run on The Flash or Batman or what I think he's done just a ton of DC stuff.
He's done a lot.
Done a lot of DC stuff. I really like him. I think he's done some great stuff over there. But this Nail Biter, another one that I heard from you guys in your show, and I jumped on it. And it is my exact style. This
really?
is
Okay.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I am a weirdo with the serial killer stuff. I know it's a weird thing, but whether it's Mindhunter or Silence of the Lambs or Seven, like this is in that realm. And this was a 30-issue run written back in 2014 through 17. They came back with a Nail Biter Returns in 2020, which ran for 10 issues. But this is the synopsis that is on Wikipedia, and I don't think I could do a whole lot better. So for those that haven't read Nail Biter, this is what it says. The series centers around the fictional town of Buckaroo, Oregon, which has produced 16 of the United States' worst serial killers. Dubbed the Buckaroo Butchers by urban culture, its most recent creation is Edward Charles Warren. Great 3 names. It's always a 3-name serial killer, these psychos. Otherwise known as Nail Biter, due to his predilection of chewing off his victims' nails and part of their flesh.
Fucking gross.
By the series start, Warren has been caught by FBI agent Charles Carroll, but Carroll has since gone missing, leaving it up to his friend and NSA agent Nicholas Finch to search for him. Nicholas decides to start his search in Buckaroo, where he begins to question why the small town has produced so many murderers. Like, perfect. I'm in. It is gross. You get introduced to and meet a whole bunch of other serial killers who have like their own calling card or like what makes them unique. The whole thing. It's 30. It's a fast read for 30 issues. Like you pick it up and you rip right through it. But yeah, it's definitely gross, but it's all like that serial killer stuff, man. I'm just so fascinated by it. And I think it was good. Now, I don't even know if I've read Nailbiter Returns. Which is kind of weird to say because I loved the book so much, and maybe I thought that was a good enough ending on its own. But I haven't gone back and read the 10-issue run that they came out with a few years after.
It was good, right?
Okay.
I don't think it was at the same. It was sort of like tying some things up at the end, So 10 issues, like it was good. Like longer than that, might have lost me a bit, but it was still very enjoyable. What I love about it and Williamson's writing is that, like, especially with this, it knows what it is, and it's kind of like playing into the whole serial killer thing, sort of like what Scream does, like in that same sort of fact. I can't remember the character's name where he's like, "Oh, this is what's gonna happen next," and that, right?
Thank you. Watched that the other day,
and I love that, but the art. Right, it is fucking vicious, especially when it shows fucking nail biter like chewing off fingernails and shit, and it just got blood and bits. It's fucking disgusting. It is so awesome.
So this one was 6th on Rich's list, which is the highest spot that it had. I have not read Nailbiter, so I would imagine if I had read this,
I think you'd like it.
Yeah, so that would probably have bumped this up considerably, because 4, 5, and 6 are all right in that same range.
I had 6 on my list too.
You had 6 on your list too? No, you had 7 on your. Oh, wait a minute.
Did Nick fuck the list up? He fucked the list up.
Oh, it should have been a double tie here again. We had 2 ties. Are you kidding me? So this is a tie for 5th here as well.
No, Joe had it 6th. I actually had it 5th.
You had it 5th, and then so that's where I had it wrong. You had this 5th,
yes,
and then Joe had the number 5 book 4th on his list. So that's where, but I was still correct either way. So we're good. All right, Joe, what is the number 5 book on our list? We surpassed the midway point.
This is why he's an editor, not a fucking mathematician.
Yes.
So coming in at number 5 is one of my favorites. This is one of the first books I read from AWA Studios, and that would be Hotel, written by John Lees, with art by Dalabar Talaich. And this was like, we're not seeing as much anthology books we are now that we were in, like, I think like 2021, 2022, between Ice Cream Man, Hotel, and and a couple of other like series where each issue was its own creepy ass thing. And Hotel started that way, and then the second volume was a little bit more linear, but I absolutely love this idea of like this just haunted hotel on the side of like Route 66. And again, you want to talk about like a great horror writer, John Lees, paired with a tremendous, like, John Lees, this guy knows what he's doing when it's come to horror, and he knows how to pick his artists too. And Talaich has a really I think unique art style that is very fitting for horror comics. Quick synopsis on this one is: you won't find it on any map, but if you happen to be driving down Route 66 late at night, you're truly desperate for shelter, sanctuary, or secrecy, you might see a battered sign on the side of the road, the Pierre Courts Hotel, where many check in and few check out. And what's creepy as fuck about this is the main the hotel, the guy that runs the hotel. He's sort of like the narrator of the story, and he's sort of intermingled in all these different goings on at the hotel. But then you've got this portrait of this fucking clown, like
yeah, I forget the clown's name, but it's look. It's like it's like the like an opera. Clown.
Right. It's got a very specific name, and different panels you'll see the same painting, but the clown will be in different poses, and each issue revolves around a different person staying at the hotel and their creepy fucked up story, and then they kind of come together in the last issue, which I think is a great bit of writing. But Talaich, again, I say this word a lot when it comes to art, but I think it's very apropos for what we're talking about. It's vicious. And he's got a sketchiness to his art that I think adds to that. There's a fucking issue. One of the first issues in Hotel is with the fucking mother and a baby, and that fucking demon baby absolutely scares the fucking piss out of me, man.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because you guys read way more comics than I do, so I always lean on you for recommendations, and I'm always saying like, all right, what is worth reading on Hoopla? What is worth like going out and buying? And so Joe knows what I like. And so he was like, yeah, you got to go out and buy this. So the first issue of Hotel I immediately went out and bought it, not the issue, the first trade. And I think it reminded me a lot of when American Horror Story was at its best.
Ooh, yeah.
Like the first season. I know they did a hotel season, which actually isn't as good as the comic book, but it's very similar where you just have so much fucked up things going on, and like the imaging and stuff is so weird. And then all of a sudden, like it'll cut to like a daylight scene, and you're like, all right, you can take like a little bit of a breath. And then it's like back into the hotel again, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? Then they're like out doing stuff outside again, and it's like just a back and forth, and the number of different like characters, because again, a hotel is such a great setting because you're just constantly getting like new arrivals, and you're like, all right, here we go again. But yeah, it definitely reminded me of American Horror Story at its peak, which was really good horror television for a while.
Yeah, and this is one that was in the past a little bit higher up on my list. I still absolutely love it. Still made my list. It was on both Joe's and my list. Yeah, this thing's freaking terrifying. I will say the second volume, I mean, Joe, you and I talked about it. It's still really good, but it's not on the same level because there was a lot more like it was like an overarching story for that whole bit, and it was like, okay, like it's good. It eventually like it came together, but it wasn't on the same exact level as that first volume. Still liked it, but that's kind of why this moved a little bit down the list for me and got passed by a few different titles. One of which was our number 4, which was featured on 2 lists. The rest of these are featured on multiple lists. Our number 4 is Philadelphia by Jason Shawn Alexander and Rodney Barnes, of course, both friends of the show, although I don't know if they're friends with one another. If you heard when they were on with us a while back, when a small town beat cop Jimmy Sangster returns to his Philadelphia roots to bury his murdered father, he stumbles into a mystery that will lead him down a path of horrors and shake his beliefs to their core. And honestly, that's interesting. And that's just like such a small portion of what the fuck goes on.
Understatement of the century.
For real. And on top of that, Rodney has gone and developed this universe. We got Nita Haw's Nightmare blog, which for like a second, I was like, oh my God, this is better than Philadelphia. And then Rodney came out with the next arc of Philadelphia. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll shut up now. And then he comes out with another amazing one and then ends. I think he's now 5 arcs in, and whatever the last one was, we get this jaw-dropping ending, which is what we got to talk to him and Jason Shawn Alexander
about. You can say it. It's been long enough.
Well, okay, but this is like a thing that we might get new readers. Maybe they haven't read it. I'm gonna hold that one. But like the first arc is outstanding. It just gets better and better. But then like the 2 most recent ones, again, I think it's 4 and 5, are like out of this world. Even in comparison to the first couple arcs of this story. So an absolute must read for horror fans. And then again, when you talk about like when you bring up like sketchy art style, like Jason Shawn Alexander is one of those people that you absolutely think of. And there's been other artists in the mix on this one too, but he's the primary artist here. But the imagery, the vampires that we get in here, and then we get some werewolves mixed in as well. They are like, sometimes like, we live in the post Twilight age where like sometimes vampires are like, pretty or whatever. Not these fucking vampires. Not when they're ready to get after it. At least they are nightmare fuel for sure.
I'll tell you what, even though, Abigail.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sneaky gets it. Sneaky gets it.
Yes.
Sneaky gets it. But I'll tell you this too, like Jason Shawn Alexander's art might be the most gruesome and vicious on this list. Second only to maybe who comes in at number 1.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say it's him at number 1. I think
no, that's probably true. And this is one where this was really high on the dork list a couple of years ago, and I didn't even have it on my list. And it's crazy because there's so many. I think I had it, and then I took it off, and then I was moving it up, and I was moving it down, and I was joking around with actually both of you guys, I think, before, saying how like we could do a top 50. Like there are all of a sudden over the last 3 or 4 years, there are so many, especially with the indie books, so many really good horror stories that have at least 5-6 issue runs, some even a little bit longer. But I really like my top 10. I'm like, I stand by my top 10. But then there's like 5, 6, 10 other ones that I didn't put on there, including Philadelphia, including Hotel. I love both of them, own both of them. But I was like, I got to kind of find a way to like shoehorn in a couple of these other ones. But yeah, it's a good time to be a horror comic fan for sure.
Yeah, it's like the parsing this down. Like I had the last 3, I definitely rearranged like towards the end when we were making our list, and I had some that were on the list that ended up getting bumped. So yeah, there's some. This is very difficult. I think if we did top 20, it would have been easier, but we don't have
top
that kind of time.
25. We
Yeah.
got time. We got time.
Well, you know what? Maybe we'll get into those a little bit later. But we are through 4 so far. So 4 through 7 were kind of in a similar range in terms of points. They cracked the double digit range. Then we get 3 through 1, and there's a little bit of a separation. We see a few that these are all towards the top of our lists. Although this is the last one that wasn't featured on all 3 lists, Joe. But this is one you didn't have on your list, so I'm going to let Rich talk about number 3.
All right, number 3 was number 1 on my list. It's one of my favorite comics of all time. It's what really got me back into comics and like just now love it forever. The Walking Dead by Robert Kirkman and Tony Moore, and then Charlie Adlard came on, replaced Moore, and was on there for the majority of the run. Image Comics, 193 issues. So it's kind of crazy comparing it to some of the other stories that we really like that had 5, 6 issues, even 30 issues, like 30 issues. Like, oh, that's a good run, like that Nailbiter had or American Vampire had. 193 issues, and this is one it's all of it is in my collection. It was the TV show first for me that I saw, like a lot of people, and then it was like, I got to see what's going on here. And then because both ran for so long, I was able to fully catch up with the whole comic arc before the book came to an end. And yeah, like the show, there are a few issues, like a few episodes where you're like, all right, let's just get to the next one. That's going to happen when you have 193. But even the ending kind of came out of nowhere. And I was reading something about how, there were thoughts about maybe even having like a 300 issue run. And then Kirk was like, I don't have that in me anymore. I'm kind of done with it. He even kind of got to a point where he wanted to in his head a little bit sooner. And he's like, it doesn't make sense to kind of force it any longer. But no, I love it. And it was very clearly gonna be a great TV show. It was just made for it. So many good characters, so many crazy moments where they kind of set you up for something. And the art is really good in this. Like the black and white, I think, works perfect for it. And I don't know, you just go on that journey. I love like post-apocalyptic stuff. This was, even before zombie stuff really took off. Then maybe people may have gotten burned out on zombies, but when this first came out, all the way back in 2003, that was the first issue of The Walking Dead. It was 03. Then they finally wrapped up in 2019. But like I said with American Vampire, like just talking comics in general, like if you're including Batman, you're including Daredevil, like I'm putting The Walking Dead and I'm putting American Vampire up there with anything.
Yeah, and then the early aughts. You bring up how when this started too. The early aughts was a great time to be a zombie fan because you got this, and then you also got 28 Days Later at the same time, and not long after 28 Weeks Later, and different types of zombies, but still like huge for the genre, and they're probably part of why. Because then 06 is when we got World War Z, the book, I think,
which was tremendous.
Zack Snyder did the remake of Dawn of the Dead, written by James Gunn, and that was in 04, I believe. And that was awesome. Like that was incredible. And that sort of like brought people back to the Romero movies, and it brought back people really into zombies. And then like what they've said too before is like The Walking Dead is actually describing the people who are alive. Like that was sort of the big thing with this book is like that's not the zombies. They don't even say zombie in the show or the comic, but The Walking Dead. And then what you find is that the other surviving people end up being far more dangerous than the zombies. Because this is still a slow zombie, right? Like 28 Days Later, it's the fast zombies. Or, I was watching the Train to Busan. Like that's fast, flat, like real fast zombies. This is slow ass moving zombies. But you run into all these different people that are just so protective of their area or whatever. And it's just human beings not wanting to work together is like kind of what ends up being most of this story, which is great. And then all of a sudden, like just when you think it's just that, then yes, somebody gets bit by a fucking zombie, and then you got to go from there.
Yeah. It really is outstanding. And that show, I know it's had like its ups and downs for a while, though. It was absolutely can't miss television. And I still have to finish the show. I'm like right there. But obviously there's a whole lot of other shit to watch. But yeah, this absolutely has to be on the list. This moved down just a smidge for me because of because of my number one book. That's the only reason. Otherwise, it would have been right back at number two. But yeah, The Walking Dead is outstanding. And yeah, it was originally from Image and then Skybound when Kirkman formed Skybound. And a little factoid about our list. This is actually maybe a spoiler, but it's the last Image book that we have featured on this list. And Image was the most well represented publisher on our list. And then if you factor in Skybound, it adds a little extra to it. But the next one, number two, Joe, because you have not read The Walking Dead, right?
Yeah, only because it's just so daunting. 193 issues. That's
insane.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And
Yeah,
I remember like, oh, I should probably start reading it when the show came out, and then I just started watching the show, and then the show got to a point I go, fuck this, I'm not watching this shit anymore. And so, but I have no doubt, because Kirkman is a hell of a writer, and the praise that this book gets, and is deservedly so, should be on this list. So maybe one day I'll grab an omnibus, or I'll grab a couple of the thick bitches, and
I think it's in 4 compendiums. I
Yeah.
think is what it was. And so like I bought the first 2, and then from there I was like kind of just grabbing like the individual trades.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, as daunting as it is, it's one of those books that if you read the first issue, you'd be like,
Yeah.
fuck,
Yeah, because they've been re-releasing them now, I believe, in color.
Yes.
Yeah, they are, which is kind of interesting. I might want to check those out. I did like and appreciated the black and white, but I should, because I like it so much, I should give it a go. See how different it is.
I think it's under the title now of Walking Dead, The Walking Dead Deluxe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's coming out monthly. Then now let's move over to our number 2, Joe, which was again featured on all 3 lists. It was this, our number 1, and Gideon Falls, oddly enough, our number 10 was the only other one featured on all 3 lists.
Yeah, so coming in at number 2 is The Autumnal, written by Daniel Kraus, and art by Chris Sheehan. And so when I read this was a book that was recommended to me. You gotta check this out and read it. And I read the first issue, and I called dibs on it immediately. And so I talked about it.
You called dibs on it before you read it, I thought. I honestly think you did. And that might have been one of the first. No, you got the advanced copies.
I got the advanced. Yeah,
I'll shut up. I'll shut
Thank
up.
you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate
Jesus Christ.
this fucking guy, right?
Okay.
TLDR brought to you by Rick Keefe and Backcracker Dr. Joe.
Oh, interesting.
So, witches didn't make this list, but Autumnal did. So I it kind of works out, because I think, to me, honestly, like Autumnal is a slightly better version of Witches. They're both very, very similar. And I reread Witches, the first couple issues of it, at least, just to kind of refamiliar, because make sure, like, does it, should I bump it off or something? Anyways, and I love it, and I love the art, and everything about it is great. But the Autumnal just gives you that. It gives you that Stephen King small town New Hampshire creepy ass vibe. And while not every issue is packed to the gills with gore, it's the suspense, it's the villain you don't see, right? And then when it all comes together at the end, it just fucking hits you over the head. And it is so layered. The art's fantastic. Everything about this book, like the fucking covers. Amazon wouldn't publish the covers on their website because they thought they were too
outstanding,
too creepy, which I thought was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
The synopsis on this is wildly too long. I'm not going to read it, but
brutal. God.
Yeah.
If you don't like body horror, you don't want to have that in your house.
Yeah. So gross. Fucking good.
Absolutely gross.
Yeah.
But yeah, Daniel Kraus, now friend of the show, and it was fun getting to talk to him about that. And obviously Trojan, which he wrote for AWA, which is more of is a book that came to my mind in this conversation, but that's like a dark fantasy,
sci-fi,
sci-fi kind of story. So didn't crack the list, but yeah, you couldn't say it better, Joe. Like the witches walked so this could crawl so this could walk. Or sprint, however you want to look at it. It was outstanding. Like I do love Witches that had been on my list previously. But Autumnal is just, to me, a step above, and it's just like it's just because of the story, honestly. In that instance, it's just a little bit like creepier, the vibe to it, the Stephen King stuff, like you said, like there's all of that in here, and that's the atmosphere, like I said, is so important, and you get that little extra layer here, and why it has that.
Yeah, the mother-daughter relationship, the mother, right, all of it. It's so fucking good.
Good, and like sticks the landing too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 It does. They really fuck with you at the ending there. It's outstanding. Now, before we get to our number one, let's just roll through some honorable mentions. So we only have 10 books on our list, but there were 17 books in total that got votes. Obviously, not all of them can make the list. That Texas Blood was the one that got screwed. Actually, the first three out got screwed. So that Texas Blood had the same score as Gideon Falls, but it was only mentioned on Rich Keefe's list, which was your number 3.
Yeah, it was my number 3. So another one that you guys recommended, and I love it. I love it. And I understand that maybe not everybody would include it as horror. And I think that's sort of like an interesting distinction. Like when you look up lists, like where you're listening to this, you're like, all right, top 10 horror books. There are plenty of comics, just like movies and shows, that have multiple genres. Like there can be something that is clearly science fiction, but it's scary. So you're like, all right, that's sci-fi and horror. Or, it can be a thriller, but it's fucking scary. So it's also horror. This is like I don't know, it's like Western meets mystery, like all this kind of thing. But there's some scary stuff in there. There's a cult. I feel like cults kind of put you into the category of horror in a way.
That's fair.
Was it the second arc that told that creepy ass cult
Yeah,
story?
and you know what? You talked about setting an image of Gideon Falls. I think you did the same thing with that Texas Blood.
Oh yeah,
to read it, and I was like, yeah, look at that fucking guy. I'm like, that's creepy as hell. So like that to me, like read as horror, but I understand that not everybody would include it as horror. But I loved this book. So yeah, I had it number 3 on my list.
Yeah, I have since gotten to read this as well because Joe did talk about it on the show, and that Texas Blood is outstanding. And I did not have it on my list. I know Joe did not have it on his list, but I will say, in fairness to you, Rich, like when I saw it, and I was like, okay, I love this book. It's outstanding, but it's not. I don't look at it as horror. And I went and looked it up afterwards. It's like, no, there are people who absolutely. So you are not alone. And I'm curious if we have listeners that feel that Texas Blood should be on this list. But Joe, obviously, you love this thing too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's well written. The art style fits the story, right? You got that, those pastel sort of Western, colors to it. But when you get violence in this book, when there's acts of violence, holy shit! And then I believe it's the second book, the second arc, that's revolving around kidnappings and the cult, like that 100%. 100% it is, because it the suspense, right? Because every panel of every page, when you flip it, your heart's beating just a little bit faster, because there's a deadline, and you can feel it. It's palpable from the main character, because he's trying to solve what's going on before it's too late, and that's what makes, I think, horror. Because you've got the slashers and you got all those things, but I think, to me, like, real horror is that there's the shit that gets your heart racing a little bit, get you feeling, and get you sweating a little bit.
You having regrets, Joe?
Would you put that on the list now? You thinking maybe horror?
Yeah. 2 years, I'll have it on my top 40.
Tune in at 25.
So that received 8 points in total. Then we had 3 at 7, but we actually had 2 books that got multiple list mentions but did not make the list. Both get 7 points. Witches was a little bit higher than Night of the Ghoul on personal lists, but obviously both Scott Snyder books. So again, he had 3 books that were up for consideration. Obviously, an amazing horror writer. But I'll tell you what, Joe, Night of the Ghoul, I think I did this one. This was one that I was really like dying to wait on. And then you talked about it recently. I think I read this while I was on my honeymoon or in transit, whatever. This is it's awesome. And it's such a good story. And then you get to the end. It's like, wait, what the fuck? It's such, the ending is top tier, friggin' outstanding. You and I both had this on our list. Rich, have you read it yet?
I did. I like Night of the Ghoul. I love like witches and American Vampire. Like, so Scott Snyder horror, which he has a lot of. I trying to like whittle it down to 10 was tough, but I have read Night of the Ghoul and I liked it. Not as much as you guys did, clearly, but definitely. I love the premise too, like the idea of like this old movie, like trying to get like to finish this film. Like, what a cool idea, and just kind of like shopping that around, like how chaotic it is early on. Like, I did like it. I just happen to like witches and vampire more.
And talk about another great horror artist is Francisco Francavilla, right? He gets gritty with it.
Well, you know what I was thinking too when I was like all these Scott Snyder books is another topic that we could do at some point is top 10 writers or top 25 writers, because there's so many Scott Snyder books that are like my favorite. But then you keep like naming guys and like, oh my God, there's so many of them. But like
It's not.
there's so many guys that have like that can do horror. They can also do superhero stuff. They do creator own stuff. Like it's like bounce around. Like the guys that can do like a whole different variety of books is super impressive to me.
Yeah.
We need this is not a horror book. I need Richard Keefe to read Sex Criminals with Katie.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, geez.
Read it together.
Wow.
Read it together. Make sure Stacey's not around.
He's like a couples counselor all of a sudden. He's like, you know what I need?
I was reading this. I was reading this in the fucking while Violet was taking dance classes, and I'm in the fucking waiting room, and I'm reading it, and I go, "Oh shit, got to put this away."
Yeah, like,
but no, seriously, I say that because I let Megan read some of it, and she goes, "2 men wrote this book." Oh, and I said, yeah. And she's like, she was absolutely blown away. It's a great story. But like Zdarsky's art and like the hidden shit that they put in there, like in the background, and like it is fucking hysterical. That's my chip. He's on the top 10 on the list.
He's Joe's chip. We got to make sure that's on record every time we talk about him. So then we got number 14, also getting 7 points, was The Sandman, which Rich, you had that on your list at what was it, number 4? Yeah, I mean, obviously
4. So like there's so many and we talk about Hellblazer with like Ennis, or like you can talk about like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, but I think like Neil Gaiman's Sandman, it's a really long run. I loved the show adaptation, loved it, and like some of the key stories that they did in the show were incredible reading, like as the book. Like that one story about like the guy who was gonna live forever, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll meet you at this bar like every however many years, and we'll meet right here." They do a great. It's a really cool story in the comic. They acted out really well in the Netflix show, but it's just a cool character, cool creepy character.
Yeah.
Like, he's dealing with all kinds of other people. He's going to hell. He's dealing with dreams. He's doing all kinds of stuff. It's sick.
Yeah, Joe, it's not just the Corinthian, Joe. I know that's your problem.
But there's other scary stuff too. There's some other
Doc's out on this one.
Yeah, I say I look at this as dark fantasy. That's why it's not on my list here, because this Sandman's fucking outstanding. Neil Gaiman's one of the best writers, period, of our lifetime.
He'd be on that top 10 list. Easy.
Oh yeah, 1000%. Then we move to number 15. We got Harrower, which is from Boom Studios, which I did have on my list, pretty high up, and I praised this pretty a lot when I talked about it on the show. Of course, Boom Studios. So Boom and then Dark Horse are the only two that received votes on our list, but were not represented on the final list. But Harrower, honestly, in the end, Harrower kind of got screwed, because I think, Rich, you will like it based on what you like from horror movies. And then, Joe, you have not had a chance to give this one a look yet either, but Harrower is friggin' outstanding. Then 16 is Arkham Asylum, which was on Rich's list. And then the last one, which is the only book on Joe's list that was the only one that got a single vote. Everything else he had someone else also voted on. Well done, Joe. Sacrament from AWA Studios, which we both have read, Rich and I, and I fucking love it.
I thought about it. So I had Gideon Falls 10th on my list, and I had at one point I had Philadelphia there, then I had Hotel there, then I had Sacrament there. Like I was like swapping them out. I'm like, who should I put there? And I ended up with Gideon Falls, but it literally could have been any of them. So I really, really liked Sacrament. As for Arkham Asylum, like we did a top 10 Batman books. You guys were on Dork a couple of years ago. I think it was actually one of the most listened to episodes that whole year. It was a big episode. So you guys did a hell of a job.
Look at that. Glad we have the same effect that you have on our show. That's good.
but Arkham Asylum, like the art in that is really what makes it horror. I don't know how many other Batman books are technically horror. Even something like The Long Halloween, which is my favorite. It's it's Halloween, but it's also it's more of a whodunit. It's more like it's not really a horror book to me. But out of all the classic Batman ones, I feel like Arkham Asylum is in this genre, and that's why I had it on my list.
So what was the other ones that you had? Now that we've kind of gone through all these other honorable mentions here, what were the ones that you had that like just missed your list?
Well, so one of the ones, it was more, not that it missed my list, it would have been like number 1, but I don't think it's horror. But do you guys consider, and maybe you don't because it's not on your list, but could you make a case that Preacher is a horror book?
I
You
had
could.
on consideration. I had
Yeah,
on the consideration list.
Because if it's horror, it's number one for me. But I'm like, maybe like it's a lot of other stuff and like
yeah,
maybe-
that's why I kept it under consideration because I don't strike that. I don't. To me, that's not it's a fucked up book.
It's
Fucked
crazy.
up shit to have that, but I don't consider
But you're
that
dealing
horror.
with like I don't know, like heaven and hell, and like some of the stuff.
Yeah.
There's a vampire in there, and like I don't know, that's kind of walking down that line of horror. But like for some reason, it's not because so I left it off obviously for that reason. But it was more fighting over that. Like I already talked about a lot of the other honorable mentions, like you like the ones that you guys had on your list that I've read, I really liked. But yeah, Preacher was one where I'm like, I don't think so. But
Preacher, like Saga, I almost put in their own fucking separate category of what they are.
It's
You know
whatever
what I mean?
Preacher is.
You could probably put them in their own category together and just label it
It's
acid.
just Preacher, right? Saga,
Wild.
right? And then everything else, right?
Fucking nuts. But yes, that is one that's like in that conversation. It's like I just don't think from a genre standpoint it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
A couple books I had. One that I recently talked about on the show, Road of Bones, which is we talk about teams Richard Dueck and Alex Cormack. Road of Bones, Sea of Sorrows, and then Breath of Shadows. All very three distinct stories, and even like Cormac's art is different, sort of, and a lot of that has to do with the colorist, which plays a tremendous role. But those are all like really great horror books. Like, are they top 10 for me? No, they fell just short. But if we ever expanded this to top 25, they might make it on there for sure.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, Joker, Harley, Criminal Sanity. I read that for the first time when we were doing our Black Label books, and again, that's maybe you consider it more crime and mystery, but there's this heavy serial killer element to it, and the art gets vicious in that. And there's there's definitely some moments you go, that's fucked up. Then there's like books like Lock and Key, The Silver Coin, Crimson Cage, also by Alex Cormack and John Lees. Year Zero. If you guys love zombies, like this is a book. Right.
Hey, listen, if you listen to fucking TLDR, you need to go and buy Year Zero, okay? Especially Volume 0 if you can find it anywhere.
Brag. But yeah, like that's a World Tree, which I just had you guys read recently. Like, is that a horror book? Is it just seriously fucked up? But like I thought about it.
I thought about it.
I know that's probably on there. I saw JT in the chat had World Tree and Something Is Killing the Children, which I'm surprised, Joe, I know you've been a big proponent of.
It's one of my favorite books. I don't. To me, that's not horror. It's just a really good. It just. I don't know.
It was on our list for Rich's thing.
It's close, dude. I think,
yeah. Like I was surprised that you had it off.
Something is killing.
It's become less about monsters lately. Than it was to start.
I've only read I think 2 or 3 trades of it, so maybe I'm not. But like World Tree,
question Joe on this.
World Tree was bananas to me. I read that too, but I don't know if I included that as horror. Right. Like I had like the Dollhouse Family, which we talked about briefly in the Black Label episode. 30 Days of Night, which was on the dork list, the Great Vampire comic. And then Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing. I think you'd probably have to consider that horror.
Yes.
And that was insane, obviously.
Also the creator of John Constantine as well in Swamp Thing.
Correct.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So, but yeah, those are some great ones. And Something Is Killing Children had been on my list. The one that got the bump that almost snuck its way in, Joe, that I had fallen behind on for a long time, was really pissing you off, was The Silver Coin. I went back, finally got to read the second volume, and it's like, God damn, I forgot how friggin' good this is.
Yeah,
it's so good. I mean, we have, this is an anthology, Hotel is an anthology. They're like horror anthologies, like by one writer or outstanding. Silver Coin is by one artist with a mix of writers. Tynan gets in the mix. Zdarsky and Kelly Thompson and Lemire.
Lemire, Jesus Christ.
Lemire's the one. I got to go back and read it because that was the one I didn't like, but it was because the art was so like fucking nasty.
Like worms coming out of people's eyes, man.
Fuck that shit.
Fuck off.
Something Is Killing the Children was in my honorable mention. Crossed, which is Garth Ennis and Jason Burrows. They're back together for AWA. That's fucking horrifying shit. Year Zero. And then the tough one for me is Bunny Mask. The second arc was not as good as the first arc was. It was still good. I'm still going to read it if there's a third, but obviously it's from Aftershock. There's a lot of issues over there. But the first arc, there's like, I would this is one of those few instances where, like, if I had to read this at night, I would be fucking rattled, because every time Bunny Mask comes like on screen or on page, however you want to look at it, I get a fucking chill down my spine. Even talking about her bothers me, man. She's an awesome character. What?
So JT Devine just saw us. Year Zero is an absolute home run.
Damn straight.
You see the cover. You see the fucking cover. You know what's up.
Now, before we get to the number one, a couple things I just wanted to mention. So, from honorable mention-ish, if you like horror, Rich and Davey just did horror comedies over on #Dork, which is an absolute must-listen. Horror comedy, Where Monsters Lie. This came out from Dark Horse Comics in the past year by Kyle Starks. If you like horror, you like horror comedies, absolute must-read, friggin' outstanding. If we were doing horror comedies, this would be my number one, but I don't know how many of those we really get in comics.
I'd Hate This Place on there too.
That's a really good one too. Another one that's labeled fantasy horror comedy is The Dark Room, and that is by Jerry Duggan. And I just talked about this on the show recently. The second volume is coming out right around October. Really love that. And that just comes out straight as a trade. So right in your wheelhouse, Rich, you can just pick that up right away.
Yeah.
And then the last one, Joe, before you say anything else, this is a promising start. Okay, just putting it on people's radar if they haven't already read it. I finally got a chance to read The Devil That Wears My Face. This is a Mad Cave joint.
Oh,
by
what
David,
a title.
Yeah, David Papose and Alex Cormack, who we've talked about quite a bit.
We'll talk about
a little more in a second. Oh my God! If you like exorcisms, this is right in your fucking wheelhouse. Now, Rich, if you're gonna give it a look, you may have to wait, because I know you like to wait a little bit. But this is the first issue came out earlier this month.
I'll definitely check that out.
And I have dibs on this, just so everybody knows. Joe and I talked about this off air. Anything else, Joe, though, for you before we get going on number one?
Yeah, real quick. I was talking to Nick about this before we got started. So a book came out last week called Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, written by Patrick Kovar. And so there Tony Fleeks came out with a book a few years ago, Stray Dogs. And you flip it open and it's fucking dogs, right? It's animals. And I didn't fucking read it at first. I thought it was silly. And then I actually sat down and fucking read it. And it was great. I absolutely loved it. Talked about it on the show. Typically, when it's a book about like fuzzy, cute little animals, I'm not going to read it, right? But I saw the cover for this book, and it's a female bear, dressed like flannel shirt, mom jeans, and she's dragging a bloody bag behind her. I said, this looks interesting. And so when I grabbed the book, I'm flipping through it, and it almost looked like a Berenstain Bear kind of book. This world full. And you're reading it, and it's a small town, and the main character is this female bear. She works at a hardware store. She's very pleasant, very polite. Everyone loves her. She says, I got to go run some errands. And her whole thing is that whenever the mood strikes, she goes to neighboring towns or cities, picks someone out, and fucking kills them.
Okay.
And the fucking artwork, right? The artwork was like the way this character kills their victims was so vicious but meticulous and clean. And it's just like this happy-go-lucky. Think of like Dexter, and how meticulous Dexter was in doing his shit. That's like this, and then something happens at the end of this issue, and I go, animals be damned, I am all fucking in on this. It was so fucking bizarre and awesome at the same time. And I can't wait. I wish more issues had come out. It's only the first issues out, but this is a TLDR worthy book.
Yes, this is the thing we're gonna have to revisit every couple of years, because again, there's so many awesome horror comics. Because that's one that sounds like that's an outstanding first issue. That's a little serial killer shows. We're getting into Rich's wheelhouse there too.
Yes, seriously.
Yeah. All right. Now, you talk about clean and meticulous, but this book that is our number one, without further ado, is Anything But That. This brings us to our 7th publisher mentioned in our top 10. We're talking Comics Tribe, and this is written by one John Lee's, friend of the show, the only other writer who got multiple mentions, multiple books represented, the only one that got multiple books in our top 10. John Lee's artist Alex Cormack, Sink. Absolutely the most fucked up book I have ever read. with an amazing fucking story from start to finish. Joe talked about this on the show, and the second I gave it a look, I was like, oh my God, like I absolutely have to read this thing. And it's available on Comixology if you want it. I got it, the hard copy, when the second volume came out fairly recently. You also have Dig. I actually got the trading cards that came with this thing too.
Oh,
it was
nice.
that good. So a forgotten East End district of a warped funhouse mirror vision of Glasgow, Scotland, Sinkhill is a hive of crooks, deviants, and killers, and ordinary folk unfortunate enough to live among them. If killer clowns prowl the streets in a blue van, a shovel-wielding vigilante in a fox mask serves brutal justice after dark, and the last bus home is always full of corpses. Well, pal, you must be in Sinkhill. So fucking representative, so fucking good. Absolutely must read if you're a horror comics fan, without question.
Your mic's off, Doc.
Joe, god damn it.
Oh, god damn it. Amateur hour. I just been Serbiak. I was so excited. I got my books and my metal trading cards. I just wanted to share them.
God.
These are my things. I collected them.
With my
should
toys.
I have bought this?
Yes. Yes, you should have.
You want to talk about images that stay with you, right? Like I remember reading the first issue of this. I got it on Comixology, so it's all collected together. But the end of the first issue. Now you talk about clowns and not liking clowns. I never really had a thing about clowns until I've read Sink, and the image of them with the fucking red noses with nails in them, right? That terror. I think I read that and I had to wait a day or two before I finished reading, because like that was something else. And again, this is kind of an anthology story, and it's not at the same time, because you do have a couple of characters that you kind of get throughout the whole thing, but like this, the city of Glasgow is a character. Sinkhill is a character, and the other characters that you meet, and it's Cormac's art, man. Whether it's
so good.
Whether it's the Crimson Cage, that he did with John Lees about the retelling of Macbeth via 1980s independent wrestling, or it's his work on Road of Bones, or this, man, like. There is a grittiness and a sketchiness and just a fuck it, I'm going there style to his art that just that's why this to me is the best horror book I've read. And there's no fucking questions about it. Like you read this, it's great storytelling, it's fucked up art, and you're gonna read it real fast, and it's gonna stick with you always. Yeah.
Quick small world story, also could be considered a brag, maybe, is so Alex Cormac's brother is Uncle Buck, who's been on a bunch of episodes of #Dork back in the day. And this was, I think, right when Sink came out. Me and like Davey and Uncle Buck were at one of the Comic-Cons, and Buck was like, oh yeah, like my brother's actually a comic artist. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And he's like, here's one of the comics that he's working on. So he gave me the first issue of Sink.
No way.
Yeah. So this was probably right when it came out. And so he's like, yeah, it's pretty good or whatever. But he didn't like oversell it at all. And I remember going home. I loved the cover. And this is the one where you have, the fucking fox mask holding the shovel.
Oh yeah.
Bloody shovel. So that's what it was. And so I'm like, I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, it's not Marvel. It's not DC. It's this guy's brother. So I'm like, who the fuck knows? I'm like reading it. I'm like, this is fucking insane. I'm like, this is so good.
Yes.
And then, because me, I'm more of a trade guy. So I kind of fell out of it. It wasn't easy to get like the other issues of it. And then once I heard you guys talking about it on the show again, I was like, oh shit. I'm like, I got to go back. And then so I did. I went back and read everything that they've put out. And I was like blown away. I'm like, yeah, this is insanely good. I'm like, I didn't even tell Uncle Buck just how good it was at the time. And obviously his brother, Alex Cormac's killing it. Like he's got a whole bunch of stuff. I've heard you guys mention his name a lot on the show, not just horror stuff, but definitely horror stuff. And so, yeah, he's one of the artists to follow in this genre, no doubt.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, this is he what's the one that you got coming out now, Joe? It's him and Duick, right? At Dark
Drive
Horse?
Like Hell.
Drive Like Hell. I'm very excited to check that out. We do have that copy. I meant to check it out beforehand. But the other thing with Cormac too. Now I know Lisa Moore did some, at least in the first volume, was did some coloring. But Cormac does a lot of his own coloring, from what I remember, and his illustration, like the way he does blood and guts and everything, is
it's so good.
Perfect. It's awful
so
in all the right ways. But yes, the thing that's really cool about this too is, again, like when we talk about with a lot of other stories, like, yeah, you get a character who like maybe you can latch onto, but like the plot is maybe what's a little bit larger, more interesting. Like where you have like a Constantine or a Hellboy or these other characters, having Dig, who's not in the mix all the time, he's a really cool character. And also, again, not necessarily like he's kind of a hero, but he is really an anti-hero. Like he does shit to get the job done and save the day, but he really doesn't want to get more involved than he has to.
Yeah, his singular like trade that he has that just revolves around him. Absolutely excellent. And when you see that fox mask, you know some shit's gonna happen. And I remember when we were talking with John at the time, and because we hadn't read the second thing of Sync yet, it was coming out. And he said, "Oh, there's one story that's my absolute favorite. You'll know it when you get to it." And to see Cormac draw with such violence and vigor, someone getting beaten the shit out of with a dildo was fucking tremendous.
Yeah.
You don't see that every day.
Yeah, I think John said that was that's his favorite thing. It's one of his favorite issues. But nice. And there's more Sync coming. I mean, that thing got funded like John doesn't need any help funding anything Sync related. That thing got funded on Kickstarter in like 2 seconds.
I literally within an hour. I think it was fully funded.
It's that fucking good. And that's and Joe, we've talked about it before. I think John said it to us. Like that's what got him the job or maybe Axel may have told us that way back. That's what got
Axel did,
the job to write Hotel. So I mean, John's very good at that. I've just got The Nasty, which is another horror story, more like horror. He's got horror comedy to it. But anyways, so that is our top 10 list right now. I'm curious how much it differentiates from the Dork list, Rich. But we got number 10 starting from the bottom, Gideon Falls. Tied for 8th, we got Hellblazer and American Vampire. At 7, Red Fork. 6, Nailbiter. 5, Hotel. 4, Philadelphia. 3, The Walking Dead. 2, The Autumnal. And number 1 is Sync. How similar is that to the list we did a couple years ago?
It is pretty similar. I fucking don't have the list in front of me, obviously, because I'm an asshole. But I think it was like 8 of the same, because Sync wasn't on there yet because we hadn't all read Sync. But the Autumnal was, Walking Dead was, Philadelphia was, Hotel was, Nailbiter was, Red Fork was. I think Hellblazer. You know what? Believe it or not, could it possibly be 9 out of the 10? Now that I'm looking at it, I think Witches was in for sure.
Yes.
And
American Vampire was in.
And 30 Days of Night was in. So maybe 2 of them weren't. It might be only a difference of 2, actually, after.
I don't know if Gideon Falls was on there or not.
So maybe Gideon Falls wasn't. So maybe Gideon Falls and Sync weren't, and Witches and 30 Days of Night were.
Wow,
that sounds right.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna go back and do. I think everybody else should do now that you've heard our list here. Go back and listen to that episode of #Dork, because it is available in audio form. Because I think that was originally just
It's on the podcast. We released it during an off week, but it's also on YouTube if you guys want to give it a watch. Either way,
and of course, people can find you over on YouTube, but tell everybody where they can find you, please.
Yeah, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube at Dork Podcast. We stream our episodes now Monday nights at 9 once a week, and so we're wrapping up Dorktober. A couple more spooky episodes. We're gonna do top 13 vampire movies.
Ooh,
that'll be our next episode. Yeah.
Okay. I'm excited for that. I saw people clamoring for the House of Usher one. I'm excited for that. I haven't watched the show yet.
I'm hoping to do that too. Davey's got to finish that. I finished that. I liked it, so I'd be happy to talk about that for sure.
So better than Bly Manor.
Way better than Bly Manor.
Okay, good. Yeah. All right, good to know. Joe, that is it for us. Although we will have what's new this week. Until then, stay sexy.
You know it.